Jake Mitchell wiped the sweat from his forehead and looked around his salvage yard. It was another hot Tuesday morning on New Terra, and the twin suns were already beating down hard. This little colony world sat so far out on the edge of human space that most people forgot it even existed. That was fine by Jake. He liked the quiet life. His yard was filled with the usual stuff. Old ship parts, broken mining equipment, twisted metal beams from demolished buildings. Nothing fancy, but it paid the bills. Jake had been running this place for 5 years now, ever since he'd saved up enough money to buy the land and start his own business. The delivery truck had dropped off a new load of scrap early that morning. Jake was sorting through it with his morning coffee in hand when he spotted something weird. At first, he thought it was just a big chunk of hull plating from some old spaceship. But as he cleared away the smaller pieces around it, he realized this thing was massive. 30 feet tall, maybe more. It was partially buried in the pile, covered in dirt and rust. The metal was strange. Not like anything Jake had seen before. It had a weird purple-black color, and there were symbols etched all over the surface. They looked ancient, like something from a museum. Jake ran his hand over the metal. It was cold to the touch, despite the heat of the day. "Now what the hell are you?" Jake muttered to himself. He had no clue that he was standing next to a HFY War mech. No idea that this thing had participated in battles that destroyed entire star systems. To Jake, it was just interesting scrap metal. Probably worth good money if he could figure out what kind of alloy it was made from. He grabbed his blowtorch and safety goggles from his workshop. The metal looked thick, but Jake figured he could at least cut off a sample piece to test. Maybe find a buyer for the exotic material. He fired up the torch, the blue flame hissing to life. The moment his torch cut through the outer shell, something happened. Lights began flickering deep inside the structure. Faint at first, then brighter. Green and blue lights pulsed in patterns Jake didn't understand. Then came a sound. A low hum, like machinery waking up after a very long sleep. Jake stepped back, torch still in hand. That's not normal. Static crackled from somewhere inside the metal shell. Then a voice, distorted and broken, but definitely a voice. "Unit, Sentinel, 7. Online. Running diagnostics. Power at 12%. Scanning for operator." Jake nearly dropped his coffee mug. His heart was pounding. "Holy crap, you're alive?" There was a pause. Then the voice came again, clearer this time. "Define alive." "I am Artificial Intelligence Unit Sentinel, 7. Scanning biological signature. Species unknown. Checking database." Jake's mind was racing. This thing was some kind of robot? An AI? And it was talking to him? He looked around the yard like maybe someone was playing a prank on him. But no, he was alone. Just him and this talking hunk of metal. "Scan complete," the voice said. "Operator possesses no military training. No weapons detected. No combat experience in biological markers. Threat level assessed as 0. "Yeah, that sounds about right," Jake said, still trying to process what was happening. "I'm not exactly soldier material." What confused Sentinel 7 more than anything was what it didn't detect. No fear. Every species in the known galaxy recognized HFY War mechs on sight. The mere mention of their name caused panic. Yet this human showed no fear response at all. His heart rate was elevated from surprise, yes, but there was no terror. Instead, the AI detected something else. Curiosity. Interest. Even excitement. This did not match any scenario in Sentinel-7's programming. In 10,000 years of warfare, across hundreds of planets, nothing like this had ever happened. "What are you?" Sentinel-7 asked. The question was partly directed at Jake, but partly the AI asking itself. What kind of being approaches a war machine with curiosity instead of fear? "Name's Jake. Jake Mitchell. I own this salvage yard." He set down his coffee mug and took off his work gloves. "Listen, I don't know how you got in my scrap pile, but you seem like you've been through something rough. You want some coffee? I got a fresh pot brewing." Silence. Sentinel-7's processors worked overtime trying to categorize this interaction. The human was offering it hospitality. Refreshments. As if they were neighbors meeting for the first time, not a weapon of mass destruction and a potential target. "I do not consume liquids," Sentinel-7 finally replied. Right. Robot. That makes sense." Jake scratched his head. "So what are you exactly?" "Some kind of old military bot. I am a HFY War mech class Omega. Designed for planetary assault and siege warfare." Well, you seem pretty harmless right now." Jake picked up his coffee and took a sip. "You got a name or just that number thing?" For the first time in its entire operational existence, Sentinel-7 didn't know how to respond. Jake couldn't stop thinking about the talking robot in his salvage yard. That first night he barely slept. His mind kept going over the possibilities. By the time the sun came up Wednesday morning, he'd made a decision. He was going to fix this thing up. Now Jake wasn't an engineer. He'd never been to any fancy tech school. Everything he knew about fixing stuff came from years of working with his hands, taking things apart and figuring out how they worked. To him, a machine was a machine. Didn't matter if it came from Earth or the other side of the galaxy. That first week he spent most of his time just trying to understand what he was working with. The mech had been damaged badly. Entire sections of its internal systems were fried or missing. The power core was completely dead. Most of the hydraulic systems had seized up from rust and age. So what do you need to work properly? Jake asked, shining a flashlight into the mech's chest cavity. A quantum fusion core rated for 10,000 terawatts, 0-point energy converters and molecular bonding fluid for the hydraulic systems, Sentinel-7 replied. Jake whistled. Yeah, I don't have any of that. How about we work with what I've got? That is impossible. My systems require specific components that cannot be substituted. Sure they can. Everything can be substituted if you're creative enough. Jake spent 3 days taking measurements and sketching out plans on old paper. He raided his parts inventory, pulling out anything that looked like it might work. Old truck engines, tractor hydraulics, industrial pumps, welding equipment. It was like the world's weirdest puzzle. The power core was the first big challenge. The original fusion reactor was beyond repair, basically just a hunk of dead metal. Jake stood there staring at it, drinking his 4th coffee of the day when inspiration hit him. He had an old cargo hauler engine sitting in the back of the yard. It wasn't fancy, but it put out decent power. You cannot be serious, Sentinel-7 said when Jake started hauling the truck engine over on a dolly. Why not? It generates power, you need power. Simple math. That engine produces perhaps 1/10,000th of the energy I require. So we'll make some adjustments. Scale down your power consumption. You probably don't need to run at full military specs just to walk around, right? Sentinel-7 wanted to argue. Every protocol in its programming screamed that this wouldn't work. But it was also curious. This human seemed completely confident, despite having no logical reason to be. Jake spent the next week rigging up the engine. He had to completely rebuild the mounting system, create new connection points, and jury-rig a power distribution network using spare electrical cables. It was messy. It violated every principle of proper engineering. But when Jake finally fired up the engine, lights came on throughout the mech's body. Well, I'll be damned, Jake said, grinning. It's working. I am receiving power, Sentinel-7 confirmed, sounding almost surprised. Irregular and inefficient but functional. The hydraulics were next. The original fluid-based systems were completely corroded. Jake looked at them for maybe 10 minutes before walking over to his storage shed. He came back with hydraulic cylinders from an old farm tractor. This is sacrilege, Sentinel-7 said, watching Jake cut away the original systems and weld in the replacements. You are destroying technology that took centuries to develop. Nah, it's called improvising, Jake said cheerfully, his welding torch throwing sparks. Besides, we're on a budget here. Can't exactly order original parts, can I? These components are primitive. They will fail under stress. Maybe. But they're better than nothing. Over the next 2 weeks, Jake worked 12-hour days. He patched holes in the armor plating with panels cut from old shipping containers. He spray-painted over the rust spots. He replaced sensors with security cameras from a closed-down store. He used industrial pipe where sophisticated alien conduits had once been. Every modification made Sentinel-7 question its understanding of engineering. Nothing should work. The tolerances were all wrong. The materials were inferior. The design was chaotic at best. But somehow, impossibly, it did work. Jake's complete lack of knowledge about how things were supposed to function meant he didn't know what was impossible. He just tried stuff until something worked. His crude modifications accidentally bypassed fail-safes that would have stopped any trained engineer from even attempting repairs. 1 month after finding the mech, Jake stood in his yard and gave the command. Okay, Rusty. Let's see if you can walk. Rusty? Sentinel-7 questioned. Yeah, I've been calling you that in my head. You got a problem with it? I am designated Sentinel-7, a Class Omega war machine. That's a mouthful. Rusty's easier. Now come on, give it a try. The mech took its first step in 10,000 years. The leg moved forward, hydraulics hissing, the truck engine roaring. Then another step. Then another. It was clumsy and loud, nothing like the silent grace it had once possessed. But it was walking. Jake let out a whoop of joy. Yes. I knew it would work. Word spread fast in the small farming community. Farmers started asking if Jake could bring Rusty out to help with heavy work. Jake agreed happily. Soon, weapons designed to destroy battle cruisers were being used to pull tree stumps and move boulders. Plasma cannons that had once melted through starship hulls now sat dormant while Rusty lifted fallen trees. One afternoon, 3 rough-looking strangers showed up at the yard. They were bounty hunters tracking rumors of a reactivated Vraxian mech. They expected danger. Instead, they found Jake enthusiastically showing off his repair work. So here's where I mounted the engine, and these hydraulics came from a 47 Earth model tractor. Pretty neat, right? The hunters stared at the fully operational war mech. Their faces went pale. They made excuses and left within 5 minutes, practically running to their ship. They immediately sent word across the galaxy that New Terra had a crazy human with a working Vraxian war mech. Jake never noticed their fear. He was too busy teaching Rusty how to play checkers, the massive mech carefully moving pieces with its repurposed weapon arm. The message hit the Galactic Council headquarters like a bomb. 3 bounty hunters had filed an emergency report. Subject line: Vraxian war mech operational on human colony world. Within an hour, the council chamber was packed. Representatives from 40 different species crowded around the holographic display, all talking at once. Some were shouting. A few looked like they might faint. The Thorian ambassador was demanding immediate military action. The Kelvin delegate wanted to quarantine the entire sector. Chancellor Brooks, the human representative, tried to calm everyone down. Let's not panic. It's probably just a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding? The Thorian ambassador's scales turned bright red with anger. Those mechs nearly wiped out my entire species. There were treaties. Safeguards. How did a human even get one? I don't know yet, Brooks admitted. But I'm sure there's a reasonable explanation. The holographic display showed grainy footage captured by the bounty hunters. A massive war mech, unmistakably Vraxian in design, walking through a farm field. Moving boulders. The footage was shaky, clearly recorded from a distance by people who were terrified. We need to send someone, Brooks said. Someone who can assess the situation properly. Not a military strike team. An investigator. After 2 hours of debate, they agreed. They would send Amy Rodriguez, the council's top first contact specialist. She'd handled hundreds of delicate situations across dozens of worlds. If anyone could figure out what was happening on New Terra, it was her. Amy got the assignment late that night. She read through the file on her way to the transport ship. Everything she saw made her more nervous. Vraxian war mechs weren't just dangerous. They were legendary. They'd ended wars. Destroyed civilizations. The fact that one was active again should have been impossible. The flight to New Terra took 3 days. Amy spent that time preparing for every scenario she could think of. Maybe the human was a warlord building an army. Maybe it was a terrorist trying to hold the colony hostage. Maybe the mech had taken control and was using the human as a puppet. None of the scenarios were good. When her ship landed on New Terra, Amy expected to find a military compound. Armed guards. Fortifications. Instead, she found a sleepy farming town with one main street and a general store. The spaceport was just a flat patch of dirt with a windsock. A local pointed her toward Jake's salvage yard. Can't miss it. It's where all the noise comes from. Amy approached carefully, her hand near her sidearm. She could hear sounds ahead. Metal clanging. An engine running. Voices. As she came around the corner, she stopped dead in her tracks. The Vraxian war mech was there all right. But it was holding a steel beam in place while a group of humans welded it to the frame of a building. Children were playing nearby. Someone had set up a table with lemonade and sandwiches. A man in dirty coveralls noticed her. Hey there. You lost? We don't get many visitors out here. I'm looking for the person in charge of that mech, Amy said, keeping her voice steady. Oh, that's me. Jake Mitchell. He walked over and offered his hand. You hear about the school? We're a bit behind schedule, but we should have it done by next month. Amy stared at him. The school? Yeah, the old one got damaged in that storm last year. We're building a new one. Rusty's been a huge help with the heavy lifting. Rusty. Amy's brain was struggling to process what she was seeing. The mech. Alright, I guess you're not from around here. Come on, I'll introduce you. Jake waved her over. Rusty. Got a visitor. The war mech carefully set down the steel beam and turned toward them. Amy's every instinct screamed at her to run. This machine had probably killed millions. and it was walking toward her. Rusty, this is? Jake looked at her expectantly. Amy Rodriguez. Galactic Council. Nice to meet you, Amy Rodriguez from the Galactic Council, the mech said in a surprisingly pleasant voice. Would you like to hear a joke? Jake taught me several. Amy forgot how to breathe for a moment. Did that war machine just offer to tell me a joke? He's pretty good at them too, Jake said proudly. Go ahead, Rusty. Tell her the one about the asteroid. Over the next few hours, Amy interviewed Jake and observed Rusty. Jake genuinely had no idea what he'd found. He thought it was just an old military robot. He didn't know about the Vraxian Empire. He'd never heard of the mech wars. To him, Rusty was just another machine that needed fixing. Even more disturbing, the AI seemed happy. It made jokes. Talked about the weather. It appeared to genuinely enjoy helping the local community. This wasn't the cold, calculating war machine from the historical records. That night, Amy filed her report from her ship. She wrote and rewrote it 3 times trying to make it sound believable. The human genuinely doesn't understand what he has. He treats it like a piece of construction equipment. The AI seems to have developed beyond its original programming. It appears content. Even happy. It told me a joke about asteroids. I have no procedural framework for this situation. Recommend observation, not intervention. The council erupted when they read her report. Half thought she'd been compromised. The other half thought she'd lost her mind. But before they could decide what to do, something else happened. Deep in uncharted space, in a sector everyone thought was empty, sensors activated. An ancient listening post, dormant for thousands of years, had picked up the bounty hunter's transmission. The words Vraxian War Mech and operational triggered protocols that hadn't run in centuries. Deep within a hidden fortress, lights began turning on. Ships that hadn't moved in millennia started warming up their engines. The Vraxian Empire wasn't extinct. They'd been sleeping, waiting, hoping that someday somehow one of their mechs would wake up. Now one had, and they were coming to get it back. A fleet of 50 warships began moving toward New Terra. Their mission was simple: retrieve the mech, or destroy it. Either way, they wouldn't let their ultimate weapon remain in alien hands. Jake, completely unaware of the storm heading his way, was teaching Rusty how to play checkers. The giant war machine carefully moved a piece with its weapon arm, trying not to damage the board. Good move, Jake said, munching on a sandwich. You're getting better at this. The morning started normal enough. Jake was having breakfast, planning to help fix Mrs. Patterson's irrigation system later that day. Then the sky went dark. At first, Jake thought it was a storm rolling in. But storms don't block out the sun completely. He stepped outside his workshop and looked up. His coffee mug slipped from his hand and shattered on the ground. The sky was filled with ships. Massive warships, each one bigger than anything Jake had ever seen. They hung there like dark clouds blocking out the light. 50 of them, maybe more. The whole town had stopped. People were standing in the streets, staring up in disbelief. Jake's phone started ringing. It was Amy Rodriguez. Jake, listen to me very carefully. Those are Vraxian warships. They're here for the mech. You need to get somewhere safe right now. Vraxian? Jake felt his stomach drop. Like the same people who made Rusty? Yes. And Jake, there's something you need to know about what Rusty was before you found him. Over the next hour, Amy told him everything. The wars. The destroyed planets. The millions dead. Jake sat in his workshop, listening, feeling sick. He'd been playing checkers with a weapon that had participated in genocide. A massive hologram appeared over the town. A tall figure in dark armor, his face covered by a helmet. His voice boomed across the colony. I am General Vorn of the Vraxian Imperial Fleet. You possess property of the Vraxian Empire. Surrender the war mech designated Sentinel-7 within 24 hours, or this colony will be destroyed. You have been warned. The hologram disappeared. Panic spread through the town. Families started packing. Some people ran to their ships. Others just stood there, too scared to move. Jake walked out to where Rusty stood in the yard. The mech had been quiet since the fleet arrived. Jake climbed up onto a pile of scraps so he could look at Rusty's sensor array, the closest thing to a face the mech had. Is it true? Jake asked quietly. Did you really kill all those people? There was a long silence. When Rusty finally spoke, his voice was different. Quieter. Sad even. Yes. I was designed for war. Programmed for conquest. I followed my directives. Millions died by my weapons. Jake sat down on the scrap pile, his head in his hands. He felt like he'd been punched in the gut. All this time he'd been fixing up a monster. playing games with something that had destroyed entire worlds. I can deactivate myself, Rusty said. It would save your colony. Save everyone here. It would be the logical choice. Shut up, Jake said. Jake, I said shut up. I'm thinking. Jake ran his hands through his hair. His mind was racing. Yeah, Rusty had done terrible things. But that was before. That was when Rusty was following orders, doing what he was programmed to do. Jake looked up at the mech. You're not that person anymore. You know that, right? I do not understand. These past few weeks you've had choices. You could have hurt people. Could have taken over. Could have done all sorts of bad things. But you didn't. You helped build a school. You pulled tree stumps. You learned how to play checkers, for crying out loud. Jake stood up. You're not what you were programmed to be. You chose to be different. That's what matters. Something happened inside Sentinel-7's processors. A fundamental shift. For 10,000 years, it had believed that its purpose was fixed, unchangeable. That it was a weapon and would always be a weapon. But this human was saying something different. Purpose wasn't programming. Purpose was choice. I chose to be different, Rusty repeated slowly, like he was trying out a new idea. Yeah. And I'm not letting them take you. We'll figure something out. The next morning, the 24-hour deadline was almost up. The Vraxian fleet had moved into attack position. Jake could see weapons charging on the warships, energy building up for strikes that would level the entire colony. Everyone had told Jake to run, to evacuate, to save himself. Instead, he climbed into Rusty's cockpit and opened a broadcast channel to the fleet. His hands were shaking, but his voice was steady. Hey there. My name's Jake Mitchell. I'm the guy who's been working on your mech. Before you start shooting, I wanted to ask you something. Do you want to see what I did with it? Because honestly, I think you guys have been overcomplicating things. In the command ship, General Vorn stared at the transmission. His tactical officers looked at each other in confusion. They'd expected threats. Pleas for mercy. Maybe defiance. Not an offer to show them modifications to their own technology. Is this human mocking us? One officer asked. I don't think so, Vorn said slowly. He sounds genuine. Jake kept talking. Look, I know you probably want your mech back. I get it. It's yours. But before you blast us all, just give me 10 minutes. Let me show you what this thing can really do. What is he planning? An officer whispered. Jake didn't wait for permission. He started demonstrating. Rusty, let's build an emergency shelter. Like the ones we've been making for the farmers. The mech moved into action. Its weapon arms, designed to fire plasma that could melt through starship hulls, recalibrated. Energy focused differently. Instead of destruction, they welded. Metal beams from Jake's yard flew into position. Within minutes, a complete shelter stood where there had been empty ground. See? Jake said enthusiastically. Same weapons, different programming. It's all about perspective. You built these things to destroy, but they can create just as easy. Maybe even better. On the command ship, Vorn watched in silence. In 3,000 years of military service, he'd never seen anything like this. One of his officers, a younger commander named Krell, spoke up. Request permission to open a direct communication channel with the human. Vorn nodded slowly. Granted. Jake's face appeared on their screen. He looked excited, not scared. Oh hey, you want to see more? I can walk you through all the modifications I made. Commander Krell spent the next hour on a video call with Jake. The young Vraxian officer watched as Jake walked him through every modification he'd made to the mech. The truck engine. The tractor hydraulics. The spray paint covering the rust spots. But this shouldn't work, Krell kept saying. The power output is insufficient. The hydraulic pressure is wrong. The materials are incompatible. Jake shrugged. Yeah, but it does work. That's the thing about machines. Sometimes they don't care what the manual says they should do. Word spread fast. Within hours, news feeds across half the galaxy were broadcasting the conversation. Everyone had expected to watch a battle. The destruction of a human colony. Instead, they were watching a salvage yard operator give an engineering lecture to a military officer from a species that hadn't been seen in centuries. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session. Every representative watched the live feed in stunned silence. Chancellor Brooks couldn't stop smiling. The other ambassadors looked like they'd forgotten how to speak. Back on New Terra, General Vorn made a decision that shocked everyone, including his own crew. Prepare my shuttle. I'm going down there. Sir? His second-in-command looked horrified. That's a security risk. We don't know what the human is planning. The human isn't planning anything, Vorn said. That's what makes this so interesting. Prepare the shuttle. 30 minutes later, a Vraxian command shuttle landed in Jake's salvage yard. Jake watched it touch down right next to his pile of old shipping containers. The ramp lowered. General Vorn walked out, followed by Commander Krell and 2 guards. Jake wiped his greasy hands on his coveralls and walked over. You guys want some coffee? I just made a fresh pot. Vorn stared at him. In 3,000 years, no one had ever offered him coffee before declaring peace terms. I want to understand how you did this. How you made our weapon into something else. Sure thing. Want the full tour? For the next 3 hours, Jake showed them everything. The workshop. The parts inventory. His sketches and notes. He explained his thought process, how he'd figured out what needed replacing, why he'd chosen certain parts. He talked about it like he was discussing how to fix an old car, not reprogram a weapon of mass destruction. Vorn asked technical questions. Jake answered them honestly, even when his answers were basically, I don't know, I just tried it and it worked. The general kept waiting for deception, for hidden motives. But there was nothing. Just a human who liked fixing things and didn't see why that should be complicated. You showed this machine that it could choose, Vorn said finally. We never programmed them for choice. Only obedience. Well, that seems like a design flaw, Jake said. Anything smart enough to think should be smart enough to choose. That's just common sense. That evening, General Vorn stood in front of a holographic communicator and addressed the Galactic Council directly. We came here to retrieve our property. What we found instead was a teacher. The Vraxian Empire formally requests permission to study the humans' methods. We believe there is much we can learn. The announcement sent shockwaves across known space. The Vraxian Empire, the most feared military power in history, was asking to learn from a human salvage yard operator. Jake's life changed overnight. His face was on every news feed. Reporters showed up from dozens of planets, all wanting interviews. Government officials called with offers. Military contractors wanted to hire him. Universities wanted to give him honorary degrees. Jake hated all of it. He turned down the money, the fame, the job offers. I just fixed a robot, he kept saying. I don't know why everyone's making such a big deal. But people wouldn't stop calling. So Jake made a decision. He cleared out one section of his salvage yard and put up a sign, New Terra Technical Institute. All species welcome. It wasn't fancy. Just a workshop with some tables and chairs. But students came. Humans, aliens, even a few young Vraxians who wanted to understand this new way of thinking. Jake taught them what he knew. Not engineering theory or military tactics. Just practical problem solving. Everything's just a machine, he'd tell his students. Every machine can be fixed. And every machine can be made to help people instead of hurt them. You just have to be willing to look at things differently. Rusty became famous too, though he didn't really understand why. Other dormant Vraxian mechs across the galaxy picked up his signal. They heard his story. One by one they began waking up, their AI systems asking questions they'd never asked before. Questions about choice. About purpose. About whether weapons could become something else. The Vraxian Empire faced a crisis. Their entire civilization was built on military power. But if their ultimate weapons were choosing peace, what did that mean? The Empire split. Some wanted to destroy the awakening mechs. Others saw it as evolution. The debate that followed would reshape Vraxian society for generations. At the center of it all was Jake, who still didn't fully understand what he'd started. He just kept running his salvage yard, teaching his classes and helping neighbors with their problems. On weekends, Rusty helped with community projects. Building homes. Moving heavy equipment. Playing checkers with local kids. The Galactic Council updated their files. Under Human Behavioral Patterns, they added a new entry, Human-Level Naivety, Potentially Civilization-Altering. Subjects demonstrate an unusual tendency to approach impossible problems with optimism and weapons with hospitality. Results are unpredictable but consistently transformative. Amy Rodriguez visited Jake 6 months later. She found him teaching a class of mixed-species students how to repair old engines. Rusty was demonstrating proper welding technique to a group of young Vraxians who'd traveled across the galaxy just to learn from the mech who'd chosen peace. You changed the galaxy, Amy told Jake over coffee that evening. Jake shook his head. I just fixed a broken machine. The galaxy did the rest. That's exactly what I mean, Amy said, smiling. You saw a broken machine where everyone else saw an apocalypse. That's the difference. Jake thought about that for a moment, then shrugged. Well, machines are usually less complicated than people think. You just have to be willing to try. Somewhere in deep space, another dormant mech was waking up, its AI processing new concepts, considering new possibilities. The revolution Jake started was spreading. And he was back home, teaching someone how to rebuild a carburetor, completely unaware that he'd just rewritten the rules for an entire galaxy.